Have you ever stepped into a house that already knew you, knew your name, your face, and the exact moment of your death? A new beginning, voices hidden behind silence. It was a crisp October evening and the air smelled of autumn. Keith and Linda, a young married American couple, were moving to a quiet old suburb in St. Louis, Missouri, to start their new life together. Keith had secured a new job at a local hospital, and Linda was an art teacher at a school. Happily, they had chosen a 2-story old rental house, available at a surprisingly low price. From the first glance, Linda felt something strange about the house. Wooden floors, aged walls, and right at the entrance, an old pendulum clock gently ticking, even though it had no batteries. "This house is a little too quiet," Linda said. "It's like the walls are watching us." Keith smiled and replied, "You're just imagining things, honey. Old houses have their own charm." Nothing unusual happened the first night, but on the second evening, while Linda was alone at home, something occurred. She was in the kitchen when suddenly she heard footsteps, like a child running upstairs. She froze. She knew there was no one else in the house. She climbed the stairs and searched the entire floor, but found nothing. That same night, as the couple prepared for bed, the bedroom window suddenly slammed shut. Keith quickly got up to check, but found no one outside. "These are old windows," he said, "probably just shut from the wind." But the next morning, when Linda opened the bathroom door, she found a sentence written on the mirror: "Go back before it's too late." Keith thought it was an old prank, but Linda had gone pale. She knew this writing wasn't there last night. Later that evening, while they were having dinner, they both heard a strange sound, like a woman crying softly, very far away, maybe from the basement. "What was that?" Linda asked, frightened. Keith replied, "Maybe it's just an old house, nothing more." But what they didn't know was, this house wasn't just old, it was hiding something. The underground silence, the black night of the basement. Keith and Linda spent the next morning avoiding any conversation about the basement, as if both of them simply wanted to forget that sound. But fear isn't something one can abandon by will. It grows its roots silently from within. That afternoon, while Keith left for his shift at the hospital, Linda tried to keep herself busy. She pulled out a painting and sat by the window, playing with colors, but her brush kept slipping from her hands again and again, as if her hands had lost all strength. And then she heard it again, soft, muffled sobbing, like a woman crying far down below, maybe from the basement. Linda gathered her courage and opened the basement door. As soon as the door opened, a cold, foul-smelling breeze hit her face. The stairs led downward, submerged in darkness. An old cord dangled from the ceiling, probably meant to turn on a bulb, but Linda seemed frozen in place. Still, she stepped forward. 1, 2, 3. Each step creaked, and the walls felt like they were breathing. The moment she reached the bottom, Linda's body froze. In front of her was an old chair. No one sat on it, yet it was slowly rocking, as if someone had just gotten up. Suddenly, she saw a shadow moving near the wall, small, like a child standing there. But the moment she came closer, the shadow vanished. Right then, the basement light began to flicker, and a message appeared on the wall. "Don't wake her. She remembers." Linda screamed and ran up the stairs, out of the basement. That same night, when Keith returned home, Linda's face was pale as a ghost. She sat in silence, as if too afraid to speak. Keith held her hand. "What happened? Linda, are you all right?" "Keith, I went down there," she said. "Where?" "To the basement. There's something there. Someone is there." Seeing the fear in her face, Keith became serious. To comfort her, he promised that the next day, he himself would go down into the basement. But in the middle of that night, when Keith woke up, he saw the basement door already open. He went downstairs. The darkness deepened with every step, and when he reached the bottom, He saw a new message written on the wall. "She knows you now." Keith held his breath when he heard a soft exhale right behind his shoulder. A definite presence of someone, and it wasn't human. A mysterious dream, seen while awake. The next morning, when Keith opened his eyes, he wasn't on the bed. He was lying half-conscious on the last step of the basement stairs. His mind was foggy, his clothes dusty, and his chest felt unusually heavy. He couldn't recall when he had gone downstairs or what had happened there. Linda came running. "Keith, what are you doing here? You never came back to bed all night." Keith barely stood up and could only say, "I don't remember anything. It just feels like someone called me, like I sleepwalked down there." Linda, with trembling hands, helped him up and took him back upstairs. That day, silence hovered throughout the house. Strange shifting noises, a hiss from some unseen corner, shadows moving along the walls, and then something truly disturbing. Linda had dozed off in the afternoon and had a dream. In it, she was inside their bedroom, but the furniture was covered in white sheets, as if untouched for years. She was sitting on the bed, watching someone at the mirror. A figure bent over, whispering something. A shadowy female figure, her hair falling over her face, and from her mouth came a voice, "Wake up. She has your face now." Linda jolted awake, and for a split second she saw that same dream woman in the mirror, and then she was gone. That night, when Keith reassured her and they both went to bed, the bedroom lamp suddenly turned off by itself. They assumed it was accidental, but when Keith turned the lamp back on, they saw something written on the wall. "She's not in the dream. You are." Linda screamed. Keith held her tightly and said, "We're leaving tomorrow. This house, this place, it's gone too far." But that night, something happened that sealed the doors of their lives forever. Once again, Keith was found sleepwalking toward the basement, but this time he wasn't alone. Linda woke up sensing that someone else was in the bed. "Keith," she called. But Keith was in the basement. Then, who was lying beside her? She turned to look, and there was a dark figure in the bed, completely silent. No face, just red, glowing eyes, staring. Linda tried to scream, but no sound came out, as if her voice had been locked in another world. The wife face, she is no longer herself. When Keith heard Linda's scream, he rushed up from the basement, but the scene wasn't what he expected. Linda was quietly sitting in front of the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her lips looked as if they had been sewn shut. "Linda, are you okay?" She slowly nodded her head, but there was no recognition left in her eyes. Keith embraced her, but in his heart, a strange feeling began to rise, as if the woman he was holding wasn't really his wife. The next morning, Linda was completely different. She, who was always gentle and soft-spoken, now seemed cold and distant. She began saying strange things. "This house likes us, Keith. Have you ever thought, what if we stayed here forever, even after death?" Keith's heart began to sink. He couldn't understand what Linda was saying. She seemed like she was transforming into another person entirely. A few hours later, Keith opened an old wooden chest lying in a corner. Inside were aged letters. They spoke of a woman who had lived in this very house years ago, Elisa. Elisa had once lived here with her husband, but soon her mental state began to deteriorate. She would say that another woman came to her from the basement to steal her face. Eventually, one day, she killed her husband and then committed suicide in the basement. Since that day, the house remained abandoned. And now a terrifying thought struck Keith's mind. Has Linda become Elisa? That night, Keith decided he would leave with Linda. He packed their bags and told her, "We have to leave, now." But Linda turned to him. Her eyes were glowing red. "We can't go, Keith. She won't allow it." "Who?" "The one who has my face now." At that very moment, the light went out. The entire house shook violently. Doors slammed shut on their own. Glasses shattered. Shadows began dancing along the walls. And then, a voice rose from the basement. "Elisa, you've come back?" The prison, where spirits breathe. The entire house had now become a prison. The doors were not locked with keys. They shut on their own. The windows seemed sealed. The outside world had become just a dream, and inside the house, only one truth remained: fear. Keith would often approach the basement door, but each time a cold wall of mist held his steps back. Linda's behavior had now become unbearable. She would laugh for no reason, stand for hours in front of the mirror, or sit silently on the basement stairs staring down into the dark. One night, Keith heard her whispering, "Give me back my face. I am her now. I have to stay here, forever." Keith decided he would record everything, to have proof to show someone. He installed a camera high up, pointed at the basement door. But when he watched the footage the next morning, his blood ran cold. The video clearly showed Linda, barefoot, slowly walking toward the basement at midnight. The door opened on its own, and as soon as she stepped down, the camera screen went completely black. Then suddenly, a woman's face appeared very close to the lens. It wasn't Linda, it was Elisa. Eyes filled with rage, a bloodstain on her forehead, and black liquid dripping from her lips. Keith immediately called a priest, an elderly priest from a local church, Father John, who had once known about the abandoned houses in the area. When Father John entered the house, he said only one sentence: "This is the same place. These are the same voices. She was never buried. Her body was never taken out." Father John proceeded toward the basement, with Keith and a crucifix in hand. As they reached the bottom, they saw a fresh mark on the wall, a blood-drawn circle with Linda's name in the center. "This is some sort of sacrificial ritual," said Father John. "That woman, Elisa, is still here, and she has used Linda as her vessel." Keith cried out, "Linda, if you can hear me, say something." Just then, an old wall in the basement began to shake. Father John lifted the crucifix high, and as he prayed with intensity, the house began to tremble. Dust fell from the ceiling, doors rattled, and a hole appeared in the wall. Inside that hole was a human skeleton, old, covered in dust, but in its hand something was tightly held. Keith reached in and pulled it out. It was a small hand mirror, and in that mirror, Keith saw Linda's face, screaming. Father John immediately smashed the mirror on the floor and placed the crucifix over it, shouting, "Release her!" A deafening scream filled the basement, and the walls echoed with a savage cry of a woman. One last message appeared on the wall. "One face, one body, but two lives. I will return." Linda had fainted, but there was peace on her face now. For the first time, she truly looked like herself again. She never left. The final captivity. Keith moved Linda to the hospital. She remained unconscious for several days. The doctors declared everything to be normal, but Keith knew this was only calm on the outside. Inside, something remained that words could not touch. When Linda finally opened her eyes, she looked at Keith and began to weep silently. "Do you remember what happened?" he asked. Linda softly replied, "I was there, in a dark place, where only screams existed, and everywhere there were mirrors, in every mirror a woman, and in every woman I saw myself." Keith held her hands tightly. "You are safe now." But was she really safe? Weeks passed. They moved back to their old city, a new apartment, a new life. Everything seemed to return to normal. But one night, when Keith opened the bathroom door in their bedroom, he saw a line written on the mirror. "You only woke her, not buried her." The glass of water fell from Keith's hand. He ran to Linda, who was sleeping, but on her face appeared a familiar smile. The same smile Elisa used to have. A few days later, a new couple, Mike and Lisa, moved into that same old house. The real estate agent smiled and said, "It's old but rich in history. The price is fair too." As they opened the basement door, the air turned still once more. Nothing was written on the walls. Everything looked clean. But just before the door closed, Ms. Mike noticed a faint crack in the wall, and from behind it, an eye was watching. The end. The screaming house is never truly empty. It only waits for a new face, for a new soul, for a new scream.